make it past 10 recordings, let alone another season. So we are so grateful to still be on this platform. Thank you for listening to us. If you're an avid Athena Rising listener, things will be a little bit different for season 2. This is the season of allies. And for these episodes, we are interviewing powerhouse men lawyers. Why are we interviewing men on a podcast called Athena Rising? Well, because without allies, we will never, ever, ever bridge the opportunity gap, the pay gap, and the wealth gap that exists between men and women in today's world. That's the reality of the professional world we live in, and that's what we're here to tackle on this season.
We are also leaving behind our 36 questions format. We are moving towards a more conversational structure in our allies interviews. Our first guest needs no introduction. He is one of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country. He does something frequently we all want to do: win cases at trial. He also hosts a blogging platform that is widely read by defense lawyers, prosecutors, and judges. It's called Southern District of Florida Blog. He also has his own podcast, For the Defense, and he lives in our backyard, sunny Miami, Florida. Without further ado, welcome David Markus to Athena Rising.
Yay! David!
Welcome, David.
Thank you guys for having me, and congratulations on season 2. That's really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're going to take notes from you. You're the best at this. So thank you for being our first guest on season 2. It truly is an honor. Look, a lot of people, David, know you from your professional work. They know of your high profile cases, your blog, your podcast, but we want the audience to get to know you a little bit better. What makes David Markus tick? David, you've received your law degree from Harvard and you worked at Williams and Connolly in DC. Williams and Connolly is one of the most elite white shoe firms in DC for people who don't know. Your world at that time, I can only imagine, was really an oyster. You could have immediately made a ton of money, but you chose, after a mere year at Williams and Connolly, to switch to work as a federal public defender. Help us understand why you did that.
Sure. So thanks again for having me. I mean, to me, I always wanted to be in the courtroom and I wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer. My dad was a lawyer and I followed him around as a kid, and he was one of the old school guys who did a little of everything. People don't do that anymore. It's hard to imagine doing some probate, some family, some criminal, some civil, but he sort of did it all. It was fun to watch, and I really gravitated towards the criminal stuff watching him. And so I always thought I would do that, and I ended up at Williams and Connolly thinking I would do a ton of criminal stuff, and I love that firm and still work with them a lot. But as a young lawyer at a big firm, I mean, you know how it is. It's hard to sort of break into court. And I was in DC away from home. I had just gotten married. I was working really hard. And my wife, Mona, was at McKinsey and she was working really hard. And after about a year, we just looked at each other and we said, what are we doing? We're barely seeing each other. I'm not in court. She's at a consulting company. And this opportunity in Miami came up to be a federal defender, and I jumped at it, and it was such a great job. I really loved working with Kathy Williams and the rest of the defenders there, and learned how to try cases.
So, David, right out of law school, you went to clerk for then Chief Judge Edward Davis. What led you to choosing a clerkship with Judge Davis, and how did that experience impact the rest of your career?
Yeah, Judge Davis, for those who don't know him, and he was the absolute best. And I've been really lucky with great mentors. My dad, and Judge Davis was like a second dad. He took me under his wing. He was one of the great federal judges, and I got lucky to get that clerkship. I applied to a million different clerkships, and I remember interviewing with a bunch of judges down here in Miami. I wanted to be back home, and Judge Davis offered me a position, and I was so lucky to get to work with the best judge. And he knew I wanted to do criminal stuff, so he let me work on those cases. And I remember, meeting with probation officers, meeting with prosecutors to come, who wanted warrants signed, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Did that seal the fate that you would never be a prosecutor?
Oh, 100%. I knew I never wanted to be a prosecutor before that, but for sure after that as well. And I just, for me, just the type of person I am, I just always sort of gravitated towards the defense side.
Can I ask you why that is? I mean, as someone who, you're at Williams and Connolly, you want to try cases. I understand that. But if you want to try cases, you do have two really different paths. You can be at the federal defender's office or, the state, or go on to be a prosecutor. You say that, with such passion that you never wanted to be a prosecutor. Why is that?
Yeah. And, Vanessa, I don't, this is no disrespect to prosecutors and to you, a former prosecutor. I love my friends who are prosecutors, and I'm friends with a lot of prosecutors, of course. For me, just my nature, I'm a contrarian. So that's for starters, I just in my nature to sort of, be a contrarian. But I've always sort of thought our justice system was way too harsh on folks. We put too many people in jail for too long. And I just didn't want to be a part of that. I wanted to fight against that. So that's always been in my nature. And then just following my dad around as a young lawyer, to see how much fun it is on the defense side, to me, and I'm sure we could debate this, it seemed more fun to sort of figure out defenses and strategies for trying cases, as opposed to, and don't get mad at me, Vanessa, but instead of asking what happened next.
No, I'm not. You know what? Look, that's a real and honest answer. And frankly, it's an answer I don't think most prosecutors understand until they experience it on the other side. I mean, I've told this to Marisol, quite a bit. The biggest surprise I had coming over and switching sides was how hard it is. Being a defense lawyer is 200% times harder. It's so much more difficult. So I get it. I just think a lot of prosecutors don't understand it. So I'm glad you're candid in that answer.
It's funny. I believe prosecutors should be defense lawyers for a year or two first before they're prosecutors. I've said this a lot. I think it would change the practice of law. I really believe if prosecutors saw what it was like to represent somebody, saw what it was like to deal with judges who are just so difficult on the defense, I think the practice would be a lot better.
I totally agree with you, David. And I say this to Vanessa all the time, because she was not a defense lawyer before she became a prosecutor. And I remember, we did a trial together and we represented co-defendants, and, she had never really fathomed how hard it was to deal with an actual person with children, with a wife, with family. It just adds a whole other level to the representation. And it also, I feel like sometimes prosecutors don't realize that there's a human on the other side.
It's just a charge.
It's just a charge and a crime. And I just, I do, I totally agree with you wholeheartedly that those few prosecutors that I find to be more reasonable often have had a defense background.
Yeah, I think it would be great. And, also, and I don't know how much this carries over, but practicing a little in state court also, because I think in state court, people see sort of the difference between, really bad crime and criminals versus what we see a lot of times in federal court, where, yes, sometimes there's fraud or sometimes there's whatever. But in terms of the sentence that's handed out for a first-time nonviolent offender in federal court is just insane to me.
Right. There's no benchmark against which to really understand that. I guess that's
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're having someone who committed a fraud of a couple of $1 million getting the same sentence as someone who murdered and raped, a woman in a back alley.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, David, after you worked for the federal defender's office for 3 years, you decided to go out on your own. I think first you went out with now Judge Milton Hirsch, and since 2006, you've been the lead name partner at your firm. First of all, why did you go out on your own? And then second part of the question is, what was the scary part of it all?
So a lot there. Let me say this, I've talked about mentors already. My dad, Judge Davis. At the federal defender's office, I had Kathy Williams and Mary Barzy. Then I went into private practice and had just another unbelievable mentor in Milton Hirsch. And so for the young lawyers out there, I think it's really important to find great mentors. It will really help your career and just make things so much better as you get older as a lawyer. But I left the defender's office. I'd been there 3 years. I wanted to do something different. I always wanted to be on my own. Milton was a close friend of my family, and so I had a great opportunity to work with him. And he was one of the top criminal defense lawyers. And so I was with him for a few years and learned so much from him. I remember my wife and I, when I was leaving the public defender's office, I started there at 50 something thousand, and we were wondering whether I would make that amount of money in private practice. And we were doing all these projections. She had come from a consulting background. So we were doing all these projections about, could we survive on X amount of dollars? Could we survive on Y amount of dollars, if things went bad in private practice? And so, yes, we were very scared about taking the leap. And we made these, sort of conservative, moderate, and aggressive projections. And in year number one, we exceeded the aggressive projections. And again, a lot of that was luck. When I left the public defender's office, I took with me a bunch of my public defender clients, and Kathy Williams may be mad at me when I say this, but I gave them all my card at the jail. They were all at FTC. And I told them all, just tell everybody that I'll do their case for the same amount I'm doing your case for. And I told them, just tell everybody I charged you $5,000, even though I took them for free. And so I got, within a month, maybe 10 or 15 cases immediately, all paying me like $5,000. But it was a great way to start my practice because I already had some cases and I sort of was off and running. And so that's how I started my practice.
Yeah, your backup plan, if you weren't a lawyer, would have been like some marketing executive.
Yes. Yeah, I guess so.
So cases stick with us. Some clients stick with us on the defense side. Of all the clients you've represented, which one would you say has impacted you the most, and why?
Yeah, that's, the losses really stick with me, Maricel, and I know this is true for everybody. And so, we don't do a good enough job thinking about the wins and savoring the wins. I mean, Margot, my partner, and I just had this wonderful trial win with the Andrew Gillum case. And yes, we celebrated, and yes, we tried to savor it, but the losses that we've had over the years just stick with us so much more. There's a couple in particular that really stick with me. The Buju Banton trial, which we hung the first time around, and then he was convicted at a second trial. We found out there was a lot of misconduct at the second trial, and there was all kinds of post-trial hearings about that, and his sentence was reduced a little bit because of the misconduct. But that's a case, I still believe we should have won, and it sticks with me, and I feel terrible about it. I lose sleep about it still. Margot and I tried a recent murder case in Denver where I believe we should have won. So that's been haunting me lately. We're working on the appeal now, but it's hard to put my finger on any one that was the most important. But I will say the losses are really, really difficult to deal with, and they eat you up and they age you. Each trial, I mean, I've talked about this a lot, but each trial that you do takes years off of your life. And so and then when you lose, it takes even more years off your life. So it's a tough business, I will say.
Yeah, because it's personal. You get to know them and empathize with them, and you're representing a human being, not an entity. So I can imagine if you're doing it well, that's in fact true. I didn't know you represented Buju Banton, David. I will tell you, all the Caribbean people were rooting for you, man. Boop, boop. We were rooting for you.
I know. I still, I still hear that. And yeah, he was a wonderful guy, and it was a case that, man, the first jury hung 9-3 to acquit, and so he got out on bail after that first trial. He was here, he wasn't a citizen, so he was detained for trial number one. So we went to trial quickly, and then he was released, and he held this benefit concert in Miami. I'll never forget it, when he was released on bail between trials 1 and 2. And Mark Seidels and Margot and I, we tried the case together. We got called up on stage at that benefit concert. It was a wild time. It was a wild time. And then we had to go to trial number 2.
Yeah. Well, at least you got a glimpse of my people. My people know how to party.
That's true. We had an office party here on our balcony, also in between trial 1 and 2. And Buju came to the office party, and we had some little guitarist here playing like for the office, and Buju took a guitar and started playing and singing with him. And it was so much fun. I remember Judge Cook, we miss her so much. She was here, and we talked about that all the time, how she was at the holiday party with Buju Banton.
That's funny. So your list of representations go on for far too long. We can never cover that in a podcast. But you, as you just mentioned, you recently represented Andrew Gillum, the 2018 Democratic candidate for Florida governor, who lost to Ron DeSantis, I might add, by 0.4% of the vote. You represented him in a federal public corruption case. I can imagine, though, you've tried, hundreds of cases at this point. With every single one, you're still learning and you're still developing as a trial lawyer. What was the biggest learning lesson for you from the Gillum trial?
Well, I'll say first, he lost by 0.4%. And the reason he lost, and this became pretty clear at trial, was because the freaking FBI leaked their BS investigation shortly before the election, which was against every regulation there is. And the debates and everything leading up to the election became about this investigation. And I believe it lost it for him, which is pretty wild. I learned from every trial, and certainly learned a lot from this one. The thing I think I learned most from this one is from my partner Margot's opening. She gave such a wonderful opening. I believed her opening won us the case, and it was really fun to watch. So the government gave a convoluted, very, very complicated opening, and said in their opening, this sounds complicated. They do something I've never heard a government lawyer do, which is they said, keep an open mind until closing, when we can tie this all together for you. And Margot got up and said, no, this is very simple, and basically cut through it all. And it was an amazing opening to watch, and she really captivated that jury right from minute one.
I've heard you say that more than once. So, and I've read the transcript of the trial, and I think you both did great. But I do. Margot's opening was phenomenal.
It was great, and it set the tone. I think right from that opening, you could see the jurors, because there was such a difference between the prosecutor and Margot, and then the rest of us. Like, they would perk up when it was our time to get up and speak. They wanted to hear what we had to say, and it really, sort of set the tone. The other thing, in every trial, I think the jury's sort of trying to figure out, like, is the client, is the defendant a good guy or a bad guy? And Margot did such a good job in opening of showing how good a guy Andrew was, and so to me, that's always such an important thing to emphasize. And sometimes we forget how important it is to humanize our client before the jury.
I agree. So David, I think a lot of us have superstitions when we're in trial. I think Judge Lagoa told me once, never change your purse. I always wear red for my closings. Do you have any routines or superstitions that you follow during trials?
I'm embarrassed to say some of them, I have to say. I will, there's a lot of things that I do that are crazy during trial. When I was young, I would practice an opening or a closing maybe 100 times before I gave it. It's less now, and I can get away with more now, but it was like obsessive. When a jury's out now, I hate to sort of talk on the phone, email, do anything. I sort of just sit in a corner and wait. It's torture when a jury is out, and I'm just trying to send not guilty vibes into that jury room. I like to get to the courthouse before the jury gets there when they're deliberating, so I can see them all walk in. A lot of people think I'm crazy to do that and think it's a bad thing to do, but I just like to be there when they walk in.
So I'm still waiting to hear the embarrassing ones. Well, what's that?
There's some ties I wear. There's some other things I wear that are probably should be retired at this point.
Okay, you have to tell Margot when she's on our podcast next. That's going to be question 1. Okay.
Okay, deal.
By the way, my new thing is I've picked up a big USA flag pin, and now I wear it all the time because the prosecutors do that.
That is hysterical. I like that.
You're
I
a
like
citizen too, Marisol.
Yes, I
you're
am.
a citizen too.
I like that.
Now that you are an established criminal defense lawyer, you can accept and reject cases, David, right? I mean, I imagine your phone is ringing nonstop, and that, you know, in 2006, when you started out, really your own firm, you didn't have such flexibility, but now I'm sure you do. What are some of the considerations you make when you take on a case or you reject a case these days?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, because you have to make sure you take on cases that are good fits. And it's a struggle. I mean, because the business side of laws is tough, right? You want to make sure that you're paying the bills and you have enough cases and enough work for the people in the office. On the other hand, you don't want to get stuck in a bad case. And you want and interesting. So there's all kinds of considerations, you have to think about. To me, the most important things are, do you like the person you're representing? And do you like the case? If you don't like the person, it's going to be hard to be involved in that case, because to me, you're either selling to a jury or selling to a judge, your belief in the client. And if that's not a real belief, like, juries see through that in a second. So, I really think you have to feel for the person sitting next to you, for the defendant, for the client. And if you don't, it's probably not the right case for you.
So does the public's perception of that person matter to you at all? Like, I know currently you're representing Ghislaine Maxwell, who's accused of sex trafficking and part of the Jeffrey Epstein network. At least that's what's alleged. You clearly chose to take that on and handle that representation. Did the public's perception of her matter to you at all?
Yeah, another great question, Vanessa. I will say, it does, but it shouldn't. So, in that case, I did her appeal from her bond denial. So I represented her in the Second Circuit on, that she should be out on bail. And to this day, I believe she should have been out on bail, and that it was a travesty that she wasn't. And I thought that was a righteous cause. And I got to know Ghislaine, and I really liked her. And I thought she was a scapegoat in the case, and shouldn't have been prosecuted. But I got a lot of flack from folks, socially and publicly, for representing her. It didn't really bother me in that case, but then, in another recent case down here, it's been reported, I was considered for the Donald Trump case, and we made the decision to turn him down. Margot and my wife Mona and I, we jointly decided it wouldn't be good for the firm, and people have been texting me, "Oh, that was a great decision. I'm so happy you didn't take the case." That kind of makes me sad that I didn't take the case, and should have taken it more, because I don't know. I like I said before, I'm a contrarian, so it bothers me when people say things like that. So that's where I come out there.
Will the fact that you're going to get negative publicity dissuade you from taking a case?
No, because listen, as a criminal defense lawyer, all of the cases that we get nobody's going to be popular, and nobody's going to be liked. I mean, it's not, if you want to win a popularity contest, do not be a criminal defense lawyer. Everybody's rooting against us, right? The prosecutors are rooting against us, the probation officers, the judges, the public, the media. So this isn't like being a doctor where you're going in and operating on somebody where everybody's sort of rooting for you to win. The nurses, the public, everybody wants you to succeed in the surgery. No, here everybody's rooting against you. So if you're worried about how people feel about you, this is not the right job.
Yeah, you need thick skin.
For sure.
So most of your cases now have wide media coverage. I mean, you mentioned a recent case of yours that you handled in Colorado. I believe that's the dentist Lawrence Rudolph that was accused of murdering his wife, right, in the African safari. That had an immense amount of media coverage. Has trying cases, in such a spotlight changed your strategy as a trial lawyer? Do you operate differently?
I'm a big believer that you cannot be quiet in the press, that you have to respond to the government. It used to be that the government was not out there in the media. It was very rare for the government to make statements. So defense lawyers used to be criticized for going out to the press. Now it's very different. Every U.S. attorney's office has a media person. They now have press conferences. They now have big splashy press releases and news conferences where they have blow-ups and presentations. I think it's malpractice for defense lawyers not to respond in the media and protect their client. If the government's out there doing it, you need to be able to respond. So I think there needs to be a press strategy in those cases when you come into it. But that's really for the client's benefit. Jurors nowadays, again, they're going to read stuff. So there's some benefit to doing it for them as well. But media now is a big part of the practice.
Has that changed your relationship with your clients? Where it's, hey, this is how we're going to tackle this. This is how I want you to behave in the courtroom. Has that changed your interactions with them?
Well, a lot of times clients want to be in the media and make statements too, right? Like in a lot of the cases for our clients now, they're CEOs or they're people who are used to dealing with media, but they're not used to dealing with them in this way. So they think they're able to go out there and speak in the way they've spoken before without being challenged. And they're typically wrong that they can deal with the media on this stuff. So it's the beginning part of a relationship. It's hard to explain to them, hey, listen, I'm going to be speaking for you now, not you. That's a little bit tricky at the beginning of a relationship.
I bet that they all welcome, though, that you're willing to engage in the media, because I think most criminal defense lawyers come from this old school of thinking, don't talk to the press, be quiet. And that just does not address the world that we're living in now with social media and YouTubers and TikTokers who are out there posting stuff. And I think, I'm of the belief that for sure the jury's going to read it no matter what the judge tells them.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look at the Ghislaine Maxwell case that Vanessa mentioned. I mean, in that case, the press conferences that the Southern District of New York had were insane. And the press, they were talking to the press, both publicly and behind the scenes, leaking stuff. In the Trump case, the special counsel's office is accused of leaking stuff. I don't know whether that's true or not, but the press certainly has access to tape recordings, and even indictments these days are different than they used to be, right? It used to be when we started out that indictments were 3 pages and very minimalist, and they listed the elements. Now there's pictures. I mean, look at the Menendez indictment. We see the gold bars. So, I mean, things are a lot different.
Yep. And there's press releases with graphs and pictures, and everybody comes from the U.S. Attorney's Office or from Department of Justice. It's insane. Just bringing it back a little bit, David, do you believe that there's some sort of secret to winning trials as a criminal defense lawyer?
I wish. If you know it, tell me.
I was hoping you were going to tell me.
Yeah. I mean, there's no secret or magic bullet. That's for sure. I wish there was. I think we found some success just in putting everything we have into it and really believing in our clients and really showing the jury how passionate we are for them. But I mean, listen, if you want to be a criminal defense lawyer, you have to be prepared to lose, because it is hard to win these cases, and you're not going to win every case. I mean, that's for sure. And so, it's a tough, like I said, this is a tough business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm certain that there's trials that you've lost in the courtroom, but you've won in the public's eyes. And so, you mentioned the Buju case, and I think that certainly would probably fit as one for you. Is there a point, when you're sitting in the courtroom and you're trying a case where you're like, going back to the Gillum case where you felt Margot really won it in the opening, is there a point in the case where you're just like, you either in your gut feel like you win it or lose it? Or do you think there's a key point in trial where that happens?
Yeah. I think every trial is different. So there are trials where I've been totally shocked by the verdict, both winning and losing. And there are trials where you can see the jury is either very with you or very against you. And that happens, at different points. In the longer trials, that go on for more than a few weeks, the jury really gets to know you and your client and the government lawyers. So, you can get a feel, I think, in those trials for which jurors are with you and which jurors are against you. And you sort of have to make a decision about how you're going to do your closing and who you're going to cater to. Are you going to try to flip the jurors who are against you, or are you going to try to solidify the strong jurors for you? So every trial is different, and I think you sort of learn in different points in the trial what's going on.
We talk all the time as criminal defense lawyers about improving the justice system. What do you think is the main disconnect between prosecutors and the defense bar? And do you have any ideas on how that can be fixed? I know you previously said force prosecutors to be defense lawyers for a year, but I don't know if that's realistic or feasible.
Yeah, I don't think that's realistic, Marisol, unfortunately. There is a big disconnect, and I'm probably the wrong guy to figure out a fix because I'm so frustrated from so many different parts. I mean, don't get me started, but like, even from the very beginning, right? Like bail, we'll be fighting on a case. If a defendant is cooperating for some miraculous reason, that person, there's no dispute. They can surrender and there's an agreement as to a signature bond. If the person has the temerity to fight, it's a decision the agents had to make, and they decided they wanted to arrest, and there was nothing we could do, even though he's obviously going to get a bond, but I'm so sorry they had to go to his house, even though he has kids, and they arrested him at 6 a.m. Like, what are you like, how did that happen? So many little things like that. And every time there's a new U.S. attorney, I get hope that things are going to change, and they never do. So I'm the wrong guy to ask, because I'm to the point now where I don't think things are going to change on those points, and I'm just sort of here to fight what I view as the injustices that we see every day in our system.
So one of the things you do as a trial lawyer is you tell stories. You're very good at connecting with the juries because you tell stories, personal stories. How do you choose what stories and how much of your own life to share with the jury?
So this is a big thing for me. And I think every closing and more in opening, there should be stories told. Some judges won't let you get away with it in opening, but certainly in closing. And I think juries have to see who you are, and they have to believe in you. So, you have a very short amount of time to do that. And I think storytelling is the best way to do it. Both stories about your client. Just to go back to Margot's opening for a second, she told this wonderful story in opening about Andrew Gillum, about how when he was 9 years old, a little nerd wearing big, thick glasses, he was sitting there watching C-SPAN and watching his heroes. And she went through who those were speaking on C-SPAN. And he knew as a poor, young Black kid that he wanted to do that. And the judge got so angry. No, there was no objection from the government, but the judge told us afterwards that we would not be able to do that anymore in trial. We would not be able to speak about, Andrew's childhood and how he grew up and his background. And I just thought, like, what? Like, this is a guy who's on trial. Why can't we talk about who he is? But so I think storytelling is really, really important, and I do think it makes a difference.
What was the judge's reason that it was,
He said it has nothing to do with the elements of the offense. Why does it matter that he was watching C-SPAN as a young kid? Why does it matter that who his heroes were? Why does it matter that he, as a 9-year-old, he wanted to do this? Of course it matters. It shows who he was. It shows, our point was that he was a public servant his whole, from even a small kid, that's what he wanted to do. And he would never do something in bad faith. So, we thought it did make a difference, but, the judge, and I think the judge knew it made a difference. He just didn't like that we were doing it.
Right.
Yeah. David, you try cases all over the country, and for sure, jurors in, let's say, Southern District of New York are very different from jurors in the Southern District of Florida. Do you do anything to account for that, different type of juror or different type of district that you're in when you're trying cases?
Maybe not even New York and Florida. Talk about Mississippi.
Right.
Right.
I was trying not to be too obvious.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love trying cases in different places. I think it's really fun. Like, I feel like a lawyer when I walk into a courthouse in some weird place. We tried a long trial in Frankfort, Kentucky. That was different. I think it is interesting. You have to figure out a way to connect to different kinds of people. I'm Jewish. My client in Kentucky had never met a Jewish guy before. I'm sure the jurors hadn't either. So it is fun, and it's a challenge, I think, to be in different jurisdictions. A lot of people believe, oh, if you're in Kentucky, a Kentucky lawyer should be trying that. My client in that case thought, well, a Kentucky lawyer is going to feel like he has to be friends with the prosecutor and the judge, and it's such a small town, he's not going to really fight as much as an out-of-town lawyer would. And so that's why he brought in, these Miami lawyers to try it. I'm not sure what's better or what's not. I know that, personally, I love trying cases out of town. I think it's a thrill.
And do you change any part of your persona at all to try to bridge that gap with the jury?
Well, I know Margot lets her Southern accent come out when we're in the South. I don't try to be different. I'm always just me, who I am, because I'm not a good actor. So, I think if you're authentic, that's what matters. And I think that's true in lots of different parts of life, right? Like politicians who do well are more authentic than people who try to put on these shows. I think the same is true for lawyers. So I just try to, I think you got to be you.
Yeah. I mean, people can read through the fakeness, especially after a couple of days of trying a case. So that's probably wise.
Exactly. I think that's exactly right.
So we're now going to switch gears a little bit and focus on you as an ally. Many people do not know this about you, but you have 3 daughters. I don't know how old they are, so if you want to tell us their ages, that would be great. But how has being a girl dad impacted your life?
Well, I love my 3 girls, and my big girl is a junior in college, and so she's a journalism major at Northwestern. And I'm really, really proud of her. She broke the big hazing story at Northwestern this summer, and she's great. My middle daughter is a senior at Palmetto, and so she's applying to colleges now. And my little one's 14. So I have 3 daughters. It's interesting to see the world through their eyes. And you talk about allies. I think it's sad, but it's true. I think it's still different for girls and women these days. You guys see it in the law every day. I mean, I was at a meeting a few weeks ago with Margot, and still they asked me, is she a lawyer? I'm like, guys, are you effing kidding me? Like, how can you it is wild what you all have to endure, even in the legal profession, which should be the most progressive profession out there, and sadly it's not. So I try to see the world through my girls' eyes, and hoping they can do great things like you guys and change the profession.
You and your wife are both lawyers. Do any of your daughters want to become lawyers? Are you encouraging them to become lawyers?
Yeah, if I tell them, Marisol, to do something, they do the opposite. So I try not to tell them to be a lawyer, even though I really want them to be, because if I tell them that, I mean, what happens. So I'm holding out hope that I'll go 1 for 3. That's what if I can get one to do it and take over the practice, then I'll be happy.
So there's talk these days, there's always been talk, but it seems to be more prevalent nowadays because we're in 2023, almost 2024, and we should have gotten over this. But there's discussion about the pay and wealth gap, which is very, very much real in our profession, like any other profession, particularly in corporate America. And female lawyers do make 25% less than their male counterparts. And the wealth gap, not just the pay gap, is even higher. It's 85% because you have to accrue that disparity in income over, decades. I'm sure that you're worried about this for your own daughters, right? Who are going to enter the workforce at some point and have to deal with this. And you just said something that you hope that they fix the world and make it a better place. But allies have to help us fix this. And allies, our male allies, have to work with us to help us fix this. I was recently at a conference, and there was a woman, she's an executive at ESPN. I mean, she was at a public conference, so I guess I can share it publicly. And she said that when she became an executive at ESPN, her husband was also working at ESPN in another unit, but he was lower than her. And she had women working in her unit, and she saw what they were making, obviously, because she was their supervisor, and she knew what her husband was making, and it was not the same at all. And it was, eye-opening to her. And also when she became an executive, it was the former men that held that position. She was the first woman to hold it. It's the former men who held that position who came and told her, this is what you need to ask for, because they weren't offering it to her. And she would not have known but for those men actually educating her. In our profession, in the legal profession, how can men allies help to fix this pay gap?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and again, I'll focus on what I know best, which is sort of the courtroom side of it. I think there needs to be more opportunities for young women to have speaking roles in court and get that experience, because I think that will turn into, the more experience you have, sort of the better off you end up being at firms where you can attract business and say, hey, I've tried this many cases, I've argued this many hearings. And unfortunately, I think you see, it's not just pay and wealth, but courtroom stuff as well, where, the guys are doing the arguments, or the guys are, especially, it's weird in criminal defense, there's a lot of sexism in criminal defense as well. And so to me, like you guys are breaking those barriers, there needs to be more women doing criminal defense and getting those opportunities. I'll say I'm lucky. My firm, I have 2 women partners, Margot and my wife, Mona. We just hired a third. I don't know if you guys knew this, but we just hired Lauren Krasnoff from the Federal Defender's Office as another. So we have, 3 women partners and me, a guy, and then we have 2 women associates. So we're a firm of mostly women. And I think that's, really important, where women get an equal role in the courtroom. And I think that will have a domino effect.
Yeah, we call that the opportunity gap, David. And so I'm glad you spoke about the opportunity gap, because it's real.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, David, because as long as I've known you, and I've known you for many, many years now, you always hire female attorneys. And like you said, your partners are women. Do you make a conscious effort to support the careers of women, or do you do that because the women bring something to your practice that maybe you feel, or add something to your practice, I should say?
Yeah, I've always loved strong women. So I married a very strong woman. Margot, my law partner, my work wife, as I call her, is a very strong woman. I think they're the best lawyers, the 2 best lawyers that I know, Mona and Margot. So I've had, because such great success with those 2 lawyers, to me, it just makes sense to keep the trend. And so, yeah, our newest partner, Lauren Krasnoff's, same type of thing, just a force of nature. And our 2 associates, Lauren Doyle and Katie Miller, just strong, smart women. I think they're the best.
You have a lot to balance on your plate. I know that people always talk about balance for women, like women have had a lot of balance. Professional men do too. You have 3 girls, you have your professional work, your cases. You host an active podcast for the defense and your own blog, Southern District of Florida Blogspot. What does David do for David? How do you balance your own life?
Yeah, to me, this balance thing is weird, because I think you have to do stuff that you love. So I love being a criminal defense lawyer. So to me, it's weird, because I don't, yes, it's work. When you're answering an email at midnight, it sucks. And when you're preparing for an argument, it's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, I like what I do. So, the talk of balance for me is a little weird, because I like it. So what do I do for my hobbies? I do stuff related to work. Like I do the podcast like you guys do, because I love speaking to trial lawyers. I do the blog because I love the district. I love reporting on what's going on with cases here. So balance is a weird thing for me. I've lately gotten into chess, which I love. So that's sort of my hobby these days, and what I'm doing a lot of. But other than that, it's mostly law stuff.
Got it. No pickleball for you
No.
then. There you go.
No, I play a lot of basketball, actually. So my sport is basketball. I should play more pickleball, but I play basketball a couple times a week.
We're getting near the end of the show, and we're hoping you can share some learning lessons with our audience. Is there a failure or a loss that has affected you and that you learned something from that you can tell us about?
Sure. So, I spoke about the Buju case. That loss really, really affected me. A case that has stuck with me, and again, people are going to be surprised about this, but I represented Gilberto Rodriguez Orwella. He was one of the founders of the Cali cartel. I was a very, very young lawyer. I'd just gone into private practice when I took on his case. There's a lot of great stories about coming into that case, but I was brand new. All the lawyers in town were afraid to take the case because they thought they would get indicted if they took a big fee. I didn't know any better. I came into the case. It was before Judge Moreno. And I believed in my heart we could win that trial. And it was a huge, huge case. And I'll never forget, the government basically said, if you try this case, regardless of you win or lose, if you go to trial, we're going to supersede and charge all of his children, his wife, and 28 other family members. But if you plead, if your client takes 30 years and plead, we won't charge his kids, his wife, and the 28 other family members. And I remember meeting with my client, and he said, well, I mean, of course I'm going to plead guilty. There's no way I will go to trial and risk my family. And he ate 30 years, and I still regret not pushing him a little to fight back against what I thought was just, being blackmailed by the Department of Justice in a terrible way. So that one has stuck with me. He recently passed away in jail, which has never happened to me before, having somebody pass away like that in jail. He was an old guy. So that one stuck with me.
That's terrible.
That's hard.
That's very difficult.
So, David, you have a lot to choose from here in answering this question, but ultimately, what do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, that's a good one. I never have really thought about that. As we get older, we can't believe how I used to be the young guy trying cases and running around, and now I'm like the old guy, which is weird. I don't know. Somebody who loved what he did and loved fighting for his clients and was not half bad in trial.
Well, David, I think you've already lived up to that legacy. And we've reached the end of our program with you on Athena Rising. We thank you again for doing this. We know your time is valuable, and you've lent it to being an ally with us and for us, and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for doing this and for having me on your awesome show. This was so cool. Thank you.
Thank you.